Now, so my name's Milne. I'm a full-time professional skydiver. I've been skydiving for more than 20 years and I've got just over 11,000 jumps. And I'm here today to talk to you about dealing with fear in skydiving. Fear in skydiving is a pretty big topic. It's an emotion that we've probably all felt at different times. It's probably an emotion we're all going to feel on our next jump. And it's probably something that we could do with talking about a little bit more. So that's why I came up with this presentation. So the aim is to teach you to be the ruler of your fear and help improve your skydiving. And anyone who's seen any of my presentations before probably recognized there's going to be an acronym in there somewhere, because I always like to give people something to take away, something that's going to help them with their learning. Now, who is this lesson going to be good for? This lesson is going to be great if you're an AFF student or you've just qualified on AFF. I saw someone in the chat earlier. If you're an AFF instructor or a coach, you're dealing with people all the time in that fear state. Perhaps you're a competitor or somebody who's looking to get into competing and you're thinking about, I feel really nervous in the plane. Is that a bad thing? Or perhaps, like many of the people watching, you've actually not jumped for months due to winter and due to COVID, and maybe a couple of things in this lesson will help you out on your next jumps. Okay, firstly, what is fear? Now, fear is one of the 6 major emotions that have evolved, which are happiness, sadness, disgust, anger, surprise, and fear. Fear is the survival emotion. Any human being anywhere on Earth is born with these 6 emotions, and that has evolved from hundreds of thousands of years ago when we used to live in caves. And each one of those emotions would serve a purpose, and that's why it's evolved. Now, fear is the survival mode of the human body. Everybody has it. And once you realize that everybody has it, everyone's born with it, and it's perfectly normal, it then becomes easier to deal with. And it was normally used hundreds of thousands of years ago when there was a threat to our life, and the body would kick in with a fear reaction to do something perhaps extreme to then save ourselves. Now, unfortunately, it's taken hundreds of thousands of years to evolve. And despite what the media might tell you, this is probably one of the safest times ever to be alive. So actually, our fear, we don't quite need it so much in everyday life. So knowing what it is and how to manage it is going to be very important for good success, good progress in skydiving. Now, sometimes people might think of fear as a negative thing, but actually our fear can help us get our best performance. So what we're going to do, we're going to have a look at Yerkes-Dodson's law. So on the left-hand side of the scale, we've got very low performance, and all the way up here, we've got very high performance. And then down here, we're looking at stress and anxiety that's caused by fear. So that's low stress and high stress here. And we can actually see at the point where we have a sufficient amount of stress and anxiety caused by fear, that's actually going to give our best performance. And if you're a sports fan, it's no coincidence that teams often have their best performance in a final or an Olympics or a World Championships or a World Cup or a World Air Games, because they are absolutely focused at managing that fear response for their best performance. However, if we have too much fear, we can see we get a strong anxiety here. So that's why sometimes we've just got to take things a little bit more carefully when we have an extreme fear reaction. And of course, if we have an extreme reaction, we can have a complete meltdown. And sometimes tandem instructors and AFF instructors or static line instructors, sometimes they have to deal with students in those states and then calm them down. Now, once we're all jumping, it's going to be a fantastic year. We're all going to do loads of jumps. We're all going to be super current by the summer. One of the issues we've got to worry about actually is when we're jumping a lot and when we're super current, actually our fear is going to decrease and we end up in this complacency zone. So actually no fear can be that little bit dangerous. And the next time you're jumping, especially if it's your first jump back, if you think that you have that little feeling in your belly that the fear is starting to begin, there's nothing to worry about. It's perfectly normal. That just means you're on the way to your best performance. Now, when we have a fear reaction, Our body normally has one of four reactions. The most common of these are fight or flight. These are the most common. The reason they're the most common are because they're the highest energy reactions. You often read about these in popular culture, read about them in science articles or magazines. So we're going to talk about each one of these reactions in turn. Now, the reason they're often talked about is because, as I say, they're high energy reactions, but we also have some reactions that are low energy reactions. So we have a freeze reaction, and the one that we're all trying to get to is to face your fear head on. Let's talk about each one of these reactions in turn. So the first one is the fight reaction. That is the high energy engagement with whatever is causing our fear. This is most commonly characterized as like a bull in a china shop. You know, on those jumps where you see people storming through a big way, or AFF student who's really flinging themselves out of the plane. They're engaging with what they're doing, but actually they're engaging with a little bit too much energy. The evolutionary reason for the fight reaction is, if we think back to that caveman picture, imagine you're a caveman or a cave woman hundreds of thousands of years ago. You're hiding in a tree, you're hiding in a bush, and you see a tiger, and you think, right, I'm going to fight it. And that was the evolutionary purpose for the fight reaction. Thankfully, we don't really need to do that nowadays. So there's not often that we need to physically fight anything causing that fear reaction. There is, however, an example of a verbal fight reaction, and you might have all experienced this before you're doing a big jump, or perhaps you see someone really stressed or really wound up, and you just happen to say the wrong thing to them at the wrong time, and they start shouting at you because it's not your fault, it's just they're really stressed and you've just said the wrong thing that triggers them. So that's a common day example of a verbal fight reaction. Now, the way we manage a fight reaction, and we're going to talk about a range of management techniques at the end of the lesson, is actually, this is one of the easier ones to manage. And the reason is a fight reaction is actually engaging with the fear. So all we need to really do is de-escalate it, calm it down, and then that person will be facing their fear. Okay, let's have a look at the next one. High energy disengagement, somebody running away from their fear. So it's not super often in skydiving that we will get people show up at the drop zone and then run off, but it does kind of happen. Normally what people will do is they'll evade their fear. Now the fear reaction that's flight evolved from, if you saw something like a tiger or a lion and you thought, I'm not going to fight it, I'm going to run away from it. Now the way that manifests itself in modern skydiving is that's typically your tandem students who don't show up in the morning. That's them evading their fear. That's the people, if you're doing a big way and they've maybe made a mistake, they don't show up at the dirt dive. Those are the people in the aircraft who, when the door opens, maybe it's your tandem students, they're kicking and thrashing and shouting and screaming, saying, I don't want to jump. So that is the flight reaction. Now, the way that is managed is a little bit more difficult because the person is disengaging from the fear and they're doing that with high energy. So what you need to do is you need to get them to change their mind and engage with the fear, and then you need to de-escalate them. Now, one thing I would say is skydiving isn't necessarily for everybody. And, you know, if you have someone that says they really don't want to jump, it isn't anything that we can force someone to do. It's got to be their own personal decision. Absolutely, you can help them make that decision. You can give them the statistics. You can remind them of their training. But if someone's saying they really don't want to do something, either their first jump or a big jump, or maybe jumping on a different canopy, you know, we can't force them, and that's cool. It's down to their own personal choice. Okay, now freeze reaction, that is like the rabbit in the headlights. That's where low energy disengagement. Thinking back to the caveman or the cave woman, they've seen the lion, they've seen the tiger, they're not going to fight it, they're not going to run away, they're just going to freeze, hoping that they're not going to get noticed. That's the evolutionary reason for that. Now, actually, the freeze reaction is quite a common reaction, especially from early jump students. One thing I would say, this is why training is really, really important, because if you train somebody to follow an exact set of procedures, then if you just get them to take those first couple of steps, then they'll follow through with everything else. So that's why for AFF instructors, it's important we do lots of exit practice. As a competitor, sometimes as the door opens for round one of a big competition, you can think, oh, crikey, I can't remember what the first point is. I can't remember what the second point is. But if you practice that a lot, then all you need to do is take that first step, and then hopefully all the other steps will follow. And then it's facing our fear. And that's really, as skydivers, that's what we want to get to. We want to be the people that can roll up on the drop zone, that can manage their fears, that don't look too nervous. And we're not going to say that's going to be easy. That's going to be challenging at first, but really that's why we skydive. We skydive because of the fear. It's that little bit of fun. And the way we manage it, we'll talk about that at the end of the lesson when we teach you to be the ruler of your fear. Okay, now we're going to talk about fear and cognition. It's the way the brain works. I was reading a book before Christmas about this and came up with a few interesting things. So basically, whenever your brain is engaging these fear reactions, it's going to release cortisol throughout the body. And that's the body's stress and anxiety hormone. And that has a variety of different effects. It's going to increase the blood sugar because it's going to prepare to power your body up to do potentially something extreme and to save your life. The cortisol then prevents non-essential functions. And these non-essential functions aren't as we would define them now. They're defined by evolution more than 100,000 years ago. I found an interesting passage from a report about what the cortisol does. So clinical studies have found that elevated levels of cortisol was associated with poorer overall cognitive functioning, as well as poorer episodic memory, executive functioning, language, spatial memory, processing speed, and social cognition. That does not sound like a great place to be when you're falling out of a plane at 120 miles an hour. And this is why sometimes, you know, when you ask someone after a jump, once they've landed, maybe you've just done a fun jump with them or done a big way, and you ask them, how did the jump go? I've no idea, I can't remember it. Or this is often why it's a good idea to have very experienced tracking leaders, because let's say someone is not an experienced tracking leader and all of a sudden they've got peer pressure because they're now leading 6 or 7 people. They're getting a little bit nervous, a little bit of a panic, and they lose their spatial awareness. They don't know where the aircraft running is. They don't know what direction they need to be going. And also our executive functioning is where we process our logic. So this is why when people are in a fear state, they're not actually going to be processing logic efficiently as when they're on the ground. And I think we've all experienced that. When we've done a jump, we've landed and we've thought, why did I do that? That doesn't even make sense. So this explains it a little bit more. So there's a little frequency distribution of IQ scores. I know it's not a perfect way of describing some situations, but we'll just use it for this. So we're looking all the way down here. This is people with IQ. So most of us are in this kind of region here. So when the cortisol hits, all of a sudden we're not operating here. We're operating down here. In extreme reaction, we might be operating down here. So we can see that keeping things simple is really important. So as instructors and coaches, it's really important that we KISS. We keep it short and we keep it simple. We've got to remember when we teach our students, whether it's their first free fly jump, whether it's their first AFF jump, we focus on all the things that they must know. And if we think that they're picking that up, we can add things that they should know. And then after a few jumps and they build a little bit more experience, we can add what they could know. So it's important to build up our skills and knowledge gradually. It's important we warn the students of triggers of fear. I've been teaching a few new instructors recently, and when they teach a demonstration lesson, if they don't mention fear at least once in the lesson, I'll say, right, it's really important that you say, at this point, you might feel nervous because of this and this and this. And that is why we mitigate it with these processes. Because I think if we warn people what's going to happen, then they're a little bit more aware, and actually it makes them a little bit happier about jumping. We need to normalize fear discussion. It's, if we tell students it's okay to feel nervous, they're going to feel a whole lot better about the whole thing. We talk more about that in the ruler technique. As an example for dealing with fear, sometimes when I load organise big weight head down, in fact, I've got a weekend at Hibblestow, I think a couple of weeks after we've started jumping, and where quite a few people won't have jumped for a while. So once they've maybe done a solo jump or a two-way and they're happy, we're going to get them into the group. And actually, probably the first jump is just going to be the base, and anyone who's not in the base isn't going to be picking up grips. It removes that level of stress. It removes that level of pressure. People are just focusing on getting into their radial and then moving forward slowly. So actually, they're a little bit more relaxed. Letting everyone know the first couple of jumps of a big weight camp, you're not going to get a red card unless you do anything absolutely crazy. It's because sometimes people are worried that the knife of the axe might be a little bit too sharp. So these are a couple of strategies that help load organising with big weight. Now, anyone that deals with tandem students, whether that's the office staff, tandem instructors, or people on the drop zone, I'm sure we've all been asked really crazy questions, and questions that we think, oh man, it's a really dumb question. But actually, the tandem students, they're just normal people like you and me. They're just experiencing a fear reaction even before they get to the aircraft. They're in an unknown environment. They're surrounded by strangers. They're about to do an activity that they're scared they might die from. So really, when we're dealing with our tandem students, that's something to bear in mind at all times. I think as well, when we are talking about making rules, we also need to focus on, if we're in a board meeting and everyone's sat there and everyone's logic is functioning fantastically, we're not in a fear state, that isn't going to be the state of the people that are using those rules. We may have people that are in their early jumps that get confused. The more decisions in a process, the more chance that people have of making a mistake. So keeping it simpler when we're making rules rather than abstract concepts, I think helps keep everyone safer as well. Okay, so let's talk about the ruler technique. The ruler technique was developed over 20 years ago by a Yale professor. Originally, it was developed for schools, and it was developed to help school children process different emotions, including fear. It was then found that this was so successful, the teachers started using it, businesses started using it, corporate executive days, team bonding, and big companies all started using it. So what is the ruler technique? It's 5 key skills, 5 key steps. The first one is recognizing that you enter the fear state. Second one is understanding the causes and the consequences of the fear state, labeling that fear accurately, expressing that fear to others, and regulating the fear for our best performance. And we're going to talk about each one of these steps in turn. Okay, so the first one is recognition. It's actually the most important step. It's the most important skill, because if we don't recognize we're entering the fear state, we can't do any other subsequent step. And for everybody, the symptoms of the fear is going to be different. And here are some common examples of the physical symptoms. Then you may experience them differently. You may have a different way of it affecting you. So the most common one is butterflies. You get that little feeling in your belly, that little knot in your stomach. For some people, it's going to feel like butterflies. For some people, it's going to feel like pterodactyls. So it depends on that level of fear. And there's different escalating things that can happen. Another one is sweaty palms, or people feel a little bit of increased heat, or they feel rosy or red cheeks. People's knees start feeling a bit weak. People's bodies and arms feel a little bit heavy. And of course, extreme, you get sometimes people are so nervous, they start vomiting. And you know, if you get in that step, sometimes that's an important sign that you should maybe need to take a step back and maybe need to calm down a little bit. Now, the ruler technique works for you. You can also use it on other people. So for instance, when you're recognizing the fear in yourself, you're feeling all of these sort of internal symptoms, these internal clues. But when you're looking around at other people are probably just as nervous as you if they're doing the same kind of jumps or they're at the same level of experience. Some people are just better at hiding it. So you've got to look for their verbal clues. You've got to look for their physical clues. You might have people tapping their feet a little bit more, biting their nails, fidgeting a little bit. And these are all signs that people are nervous. So, if you see someone in that state, you can go over, have a chat with them. Maybe there's something that you can say to help them out a bit. Okay, so that is recognition that you're entering the fear state. Next is understanding the fear state. So understanding the fear state, we talked a little bit about that already. So we understand the purpose of fear. It's that survival emotion that has that's evolved over hundreds of thousands of years. And everyone has it. It's perfectly normal. Everyone needs to find out and ask why they're entering that fear state. Everyone will have a different individual trigger. So some people, it's the exit. Some people, it's the aircraft ride. Some people, it's just hearing their name on the tannoy for their tandem jump. But if it's something that you're continually experiencing and it's causing a negative fear reaction, then it's a good idea to sit down, have a little bit of a plan, think, how can I manage this in the future? Is there any conversations I can have with people to resolve this? So finding out your individual triggers is super important. With the fear, it's a couple of things that can happen. If you recognize it, you understand it, you can either accept it or you can be in denial. And actually, we notice this quite a lot in our sport. People feel they shouldn't be admitting they're nervous, but actually it's just showing they're only human. Being in denial of being in a fear state can actually cause several big issues. Something I read about recently, meta emotions. I've never heard about them until recently. So a meta emotion is an emotion about an emotion. So let's say we enter the fear state and then someone feels shame that they feel the fear. Then they feel guilt that they felt the shame, that they felt the fear. Then they feel embarrassed, they felt the guilt, that they felt the shame, they felt the fear. The problem initially was this big. The problem now is this big. We have all of those emotions to process. Now you can just take a lot of that out of the equation just by putting your hand up and go, man, I'm nervous about this next jump, but I think we're going to have some fun. Often the shame or guilt or an embarrassment feeling is due to wanting to feel brave. I don't know if many of you are Game of Thrones fans. Season 1, episode 1 of Game of Thrones, Bran says to Ned Stark, I feel afraid. Does that mean I'm not brave? And Ned Stark replies, well, actually, that's the only time you can feel brave, because bravery is the management of the fear. It is not, there is no fear, because where there is no fear, there is no bravery. Where there is no fear, there is no courage. Bravery is feeling the fear, but doing it anyway. Right, and that is the understanding of the ruler phase. Next, we're going to talk about labeling. Now, labeling gives us a label. It gives us a way to communicate the fear to somebody else. Of course, the label that you give it is going to be subjective, and everyone will use different terms and different vocabulary to describe their fear. A saying that I heard recently is, if you can name it, you can tame it. And actually, there have been quite a few scientific studies that have proven people with a better emotional feeling vocabulary are better able to process them. So with fear, we could often just say we're scared, but there's quite a big vocabulary that we can use to talk about fear, working up to a jump. Now, the more accurate the label you give it, the more accurate the help and assistance that you can get from other people. As an example, I've got some fear words on the side here, starting at the top, which is not so scared, all the way down to the bottom. So uneasy, doubt, apprehensive, tense, anxious, alarmed, scared, frightened, terror, and then panic, and then terror. So if we're walking out to the plane and I said, oh, I'm feeling a little bit uneasy about this jump, that's pretty, you think, oh, well, it's normal. He's not jumped for a few months. If we're walking out to the plane, I said, I feel alarmed. You'd know straight away there's a much higher state of fear, and you'd know that you're probably good idea to step in and then help somebody out in that exact situation. Okay, so we've recognized our fear, we understand it, and we've given it a label. Now that label gives us a tool to then express that fear to somebody else. So one of the big problems with expressing fear And this is often the bravest step because people think they might be called a wimp if they tell people they're scared. So this is often one of the bravest steps, and it depends on the display settings of every social environment will be different. I think instructors, they should create a bond and they should create an environment with their students that their students feel okay at sharing if they're scared. I think that's important, especially coaching on one-on-one. That's a good situation to share it with. Now, once you've got that label and then you express it, often the fear about the fear is the fear about the expression. You fear what the other person's reaction will be. So let's say a student says to their instructor, I'm afraid. If that instructor scolds that student or tells you shouldn't be afraid, then they're not going to share that in the future. You may find actually that in amongst your group of friends, maybe you're kitting up, you're going for a jump. When you share with them, I feel trepidation, I feel anxious about the next jump. That's almost like a call to arms with your friends, because some of your friends all step in and go, well, me too. But you know what I'm thinking about is I practiced my reserve drills earlier, so I'm happy with that. I've been out to the drop zone map, I've refamiliarized myself. So actually I'm pretty happy. So maybe that's something that you could do as well. Because when we express our fears, often people will step in to help us out. Often when we express our fears, people will not step in and help us out, and people will maybe laugh at us, and maybe that's a good way of filtering the people that you hang around with or filtering the people that you jump with. Now, the instructor-student bond is important. I remember a few years ago, before I was kind of thinking about making this talk, I was on the flight line. I got kitted up nice and early. I was jumping, I think it's a level 1 or a level 2 jump with a student. It was certainly their first jump of the day. I hadn't done any training with this student. I'd kind of seen them around. The other instructor had done the checks and was just going to sign that he'd done the checks. So there was that moment of silence. The student just looks at me and goes, Ali, and I'm like, what? And he goes, I'm afraid. I just kind of paused. I thought, yeah, it's good. And they looked surprised. They said, what do you mean it's good? I said, well, that's why you're here. That's what skydiving's all about. And I'm glad you shared it with me, because it means you're telling me the truth. And also it means that you trust me, because you don't ever want to have a situation between anyone you're coaching where they're feeling something, but they need to hide it from you, because then you're not going to get that best bonds, that best interaction. And once that student realized, well, actually, this is normal. It's normal to feel this nervous. They felt a little bit better about the whole process. So as I said earlier, it's a really good way of getting support from people around you. Because you may be surprised. Remember what we said earlier, some people are nervous, they're just better at hiding it. But when you express it, that's that call to arms of people joining in and helping you. Because actually, skydiving, the best way that we bond isn't with the biggest ego, it isn't with the smallest canopy, it isn't by making out that you're better than somebody else. The best way that we bond is finding those common goals, those common fears, and working together to manage them appropriately. Okay, so we've talked about regulating, or recognizing, understanding, labeling, expressing. We're now onto the regulation step. Now, there's many different ways to regulate. You might find some of these techniques work for you. You might find that some of them don't work for you. A lot of them I've used myself. Remember, we're not aiming to remove the fear. We're just looking to manage the fear, because we want to manage the fear for performance, but also from the fear comes the fun. It's just like why we go on roller coasters. It's why we sometimes drive a little bit faster. It's because we want to feel that little bit of fear. And actually, skydiving is a great environment to feel that. Hundreds of thousands of years ago, cavemen would need to be chased by some kind of animal that was literally going to kill them for them to feel the fear response. But we can feel it in this controlled, risk-assessed and risk-managed environment. Now, remember, we can't get to this stage unless you took part in the first stage, that first important step of recognizing that you enter the fear state. Now, in itself, recognizing, understanding, labeling, and expressing is a regulation technique, because once you understand the fear, once you've labeled it, once you've expressed it, you're not going to get those meta emotions stacking up on each other. Once you realize you're actually normal for feeling those fear emotions, And once actually you express it, you may have people come and help you out. So actually what we've learned already is it's a pretty good way of regulating it. Different people are going to find that different things work for them at different times. But let's have a look at a couple of simple ones. Now, the first one, you've got to breathe. Now, I know that sounds obvious. It's one of those things that people say, but it's super important in our sport. Sometimes conscious breathing is something that doesn't happen. I know a lot of jumps that I've landed from, and I've landed and I am out of breath. And I think the reason I'm out of breath is I've been holding my breath in free fall. So taking a big deep breath, exhaling slowly. There's a lot of literature out there about different breathing techniques, about why it's important. So if you take a conscious breath, breathe out slowly, and then focus on whatever you need to focus on. Now, often when we engage a fear reaction, we end up focusing on something that isn't important at that moment. So it's important you focus on directly what your current step is, and then your next step. There's no point worrying about something that's really far down the line. The reason it's important to breathe, and this can be especially important before we leave the aircraft, is oxygen. If we're jumping at 15,000 feet, there's a 40% reduction in the oxygen in the air. If you're not breathing the correct amount, you're breathing too fast, and you can end up hyperventilating. If you're breathing too slow or you've accidentally held your breath, not only are you going to have the fear, then you're also going to have the hypoxia, and that's perhaps not a great mixture to deal with. So breathe and focus is probably the most simple steps we can to regulate. Another simple way of regulating is simple administrative skills. That is, get ready nice and early, even if you think that that's uncool. Sometimes, you know, we've all been to drop zones and people think, I don't want to be the first person getting my gear on. But by getting our gear on, ready nice and early, that just gives us that moment of quiet contemplation, and then we can run through the sequence of the skydive. Make sure you get a check nice and early. Do everything slow and smooth. It's better that you hurry up and then wait a few minutes than, you know, wait and then you're rushing, you forgot to put your AAD on, you realize you lent your audible to your mate, it's cold, you haven't got the right gloves. So actually that's going to compound any fear reaction. So just simple administrative skills by getting ready is going to help out. Okay, next one is smiling. I remember the first time I started doing big way head down, I was on a 20 way. I was docking on someone. He was a famous skydiver. He was in skydiving magazines, and at all the dirt dives, he was smiling. He had the biggest grin on his face. Walking out to the aircraft, he had a real big grin on his face. I even saw some of the videos. He was smiling in freefall. So I managed to have a chat to him. I said, you know, I noticed you're smiling, man. Are you not nervous? I mean, that looks badass. You're doing all this stuff with a big smile on your face. And he said to me, the secret is, Ali, I'm really nervous. I went, what? I was, how can this guy be nervous? I'd seen him on the front cover of the skydiving magazine. And he said, the reason I'm smiling is because if I smile, then actually it makes me feel a little bit less nervous. Now, this was more than 10 years ago I heard about this. And actually, when I'm training new AFF instructors, it's something I say to them on the evaluation jumps, no matter what happens, no matter how bad that jump is, when you appear in front of that examiner, make sure you've got a big smile on your face and you're giving them the right signal, because that examiner will be thinking, wow, I've just thrown everything at them and they can handle it. Interestingly, there's actually been quite a few studies in the last couple of years that have proven that smiling tricks your brain into feeling less nervous. So actually now there is scientific evidence for this. Okay, next one is positive self-talk. Now, you can spend a lot of time inside your own head telling yourself that you're not going to do something, you're not good enough, you're never going to make it. There's no point in that, right? There's literally no point. You're just playing yourself. So it's better that you tell yourself positively that you can do it, especially on the aircraft ride, especially on the way to the drop zone. Just be thinking about all the positive things that are going to help you engage and do things correctly. Now, positive self-talk is something that we've probably all heard about. Interestingly, I read about this recently. You should do it in third person. Now, what do I mean by third person? So if I was saying to myself, I wouldn't say, I can do this. I would say, Ali, you can do this. Now, I read that recently. I think, why does that work? And the reason they think it works is because when you do it by a third person, it engages a different part of your brain. And therefore, it's like it's coming from somebody else. Now, I'd recommend if you're going to do this, you probably do it silently in your head or where no one else can hear. It's going to be a bit weird if you're walking around drop zone talking to yourself. But it is something that might work for some people out there. Okay, next is visualizing. Now, different techniques are going to work at different times. So as an example, that picture was me competing in the 2014 World Championships in Czech Republic. Blocky was there. His team beat my team by 1 point at the end. It was a good competition. It was a good competition. And that picture, my way of doing stuff for the team is I'd like to get kitted up really early. I'd sit there in a quiet corner by myself and I'd run through the skydive. And before we did it, I'd want to do it like 1,000 times, as well as doing the dirt diving with the team, because I knew when that door opened, my mind would go blank. But I knew if I did it 1,000 times, it would just become this mechanical process. So before a jump, you can run through it. Also on the aircraft ride, you can sit there on the aircraft ride thinking silly things on the way up, or you can sit there going, right, how am I going to do the best exit I can? How am I going to do the best body position? What coaching points did the coach give me? What did the big way load organizers say we all needed to do on this jump? And by running through that can help you out big time. Now, visualize, and you can do it in different ways. I like to do it as though I'm watching what I'm doing from an outside camera. I also will do it then from my own point of view. Some people say never visualize negativity. I like to disagree slightly about that. Is when I do a run through, as well as doing a theoretical perfect run through, I'll also run through common things. So I'll run through, right, what if this simple thing happens? What if that simple thing happens? So actually it's primed up in my short-term memory. So if anything does happen that's out of the sequence, I can then just fire to whatever the plan B would be. And then training. Training is like exposure therapy. So that is to say, the teams that do the most competitions, those are the teams that are going to feel the less fierce. The more training jumps you can do, the more competitions you can enter, the more big ways you can do. I remember doing an early European record. I got brought off the bench to do an 80 way, and I was sat at the back of a twin otter. I never thought my heart could beat that fast. I literally thought it was beating 300 beats per minute. I was in the plane, I was sweating, I was just looking around. No one else looked nervous because they'd already done the skydive for about 7 jumps, and I was getting brought in. But fast forward, to a couple of years later, when I was doing like a 20 way or a 30 way in the UK, I was thinking, actually, I used to be really nervous doing these, but actually I'm not quite so nervous as before. And when you can take away that extreme fear reaction and you get more relaxed, you actually will end up getting a lot better performance, not only from you, but from other people around you. Saying someone said to me is nothing reduces anxiety better than action. So if you're a team sat on the ground and you're worried about the next jump, just grab your teammates and go on dirt dive. If you're an AFF student who sat there waiting for your next shot to go and practice the exits. If there's something specific you're worried about, go and speak to an instructor, because you can focus that anxiety on something productive that's going to help you on the next jump. Okay, so that's a basic run through of the ruler technique. Now, as well as the ruler technique for yourself, you can help other people be rulers, okay? Now, one thing I would say, the instructors and coaches, you need to create that safe environment where your students can talk to you, where they can be honest with you, where you have that trust and respect. For people that aren't instructors, maybe you're a new A license and you see someone on the drop zone who's doing the AFF and they look so nervous. And that was you just a month ago. Maybe just go and start that conversation. Maybe go and say, hey, look a bit nervous. I was doing AFF a month ago, now I'm doing backflips out the plane. And that might just help, reduce their fear a little bit. One thing I would say is if you're not an instructor or a coach, please let the instructors and coaches do the coaching. It's good to give little tips and little advice, but what you don't want to be doing is going, oh yeah, you're on level 4, you're nervous. Well, this is how you do a turn. And then maybe you go and like prime them with something that isn't how to do something. So it's good to have that moral support, but let the instructors do their coaching. So when you want to be the ruler for other people, you're recognizing the fear state in them. Remember, that's going to be more difficult because you're only seeing the physical and verbal cues. You want to understand why it is they're afraid and understand what labels they might use to label their fear. You know, be the friendly person that they can express that fear to. And if you found any particularly good regulation management techniques, then you could share them with them. So these are all things that could help out other people with their fear. And that's how we're going to get the best environment in the drop zone, is everyone working together for a common goal. Okay, so summary of this lesson: you've all been amazing. You've all been very patient. One thing I would say, just to finish off with, fear is absolutely normal. We need to be aware of it, and we need to accept that it's there. There's no point denying it. There's no point saying that you don't have it. Everything that you do, slow it down, nice and steady and smooth. Breathe deeply, think clearly, focus on what you need to do for your very next step. Be the ruler of your fear by recognizing, understanding, labeling, expressing, and regulating. And whatever you do, finally, when you're up there, you're in that fear state, you have multiple choices, make safe choices. Now, if anyone is stuck with anything, if anyone wants to have a chat, anyone doesn't want to ask questions on the forum, you can add me on Facebook, you can send me an email, you can add me on Instagram, and that's how to get hold of me. I thought I'd share with you a few books that are pretty good for dealing with fear. Transcending Fear by Brian Germain, in addition to his really good book about parachute and its pilot. This one actually, Permission to Feel, I read that one recently. That's all about the ruler technique and the scientific evidence for it. And Dan BC's great book, Above All Else, and the second half of the book deals with competitive fears. Right, well, that's all I got for you. You've all been fantastic. If anyone has any questions for me or anything you want to talk about, then now is a good time to share.
Jump in the questions right away, but maybe small reflection from my side. I do recognize very, very much what you're saying, Ali, because every time I end up in a drop zone, I keep telling myself, Blocky, you are surrounded by a bunch of smiling retards. But actually, they're not. They're smart, but they are also nervous and scared. So that makes a lot of sense to me. Yeah. No, all jokes beside. We have some questions that some people asked, so we can jump into that. The first person that asked something was, what if you see that multiple things trigger yourself in a fear reaction when, for instance, you're walking to the airplane, you're sitting in the airplane, the door, the exit, there's like multiple factors. How do you handle that? What's your advice?
One thing I think is, as you're walking out to the plane, and this is something that I say to people, is enjoy that feeling, because actually you're going to miss it when it's gone. Like in thousands of jumps time, you're going to sit there and go, oh man, I remember when I used to feel that nervous butterfly feeling, because actually it's just like a roller coaster, really. As long as you've done the training, as long as you've gone through everything. And if there's anything specific, and it sounds like there's a few different specific things there, just focus on, right, why am I nervous of this? Why am I nervous at this point? What is the worst case scenario? And what am I doing to ensure that that isn't an issue? But at the end of the day, enjoy that feeling. It's fantastic. When the fear goes, that's actually when people sometimes start doing more dangerous stuff, because they think, right, I need to maintain this same level of fear. And that's when people, you have to have that quiet word with someone around the back of a hangar going, dude, you need to calm down. But yeah, I'd say just enjoy it, embrace it, focus on what causes it. And that's what it's all about. It's all about being a bit scared.
Yeah. So cool. Another question is, if you see somebody, maybe a student that is coming out of AFF, being overconfident or cocky, perhaps compensating for fear, what makes you question the safety and consciousness of their jumping? Would you recommend that to them? Not in a role of instructor, but saying that you yourself are not experienced either, for instance, or not wanting to break their spirit, or coming across one way or the other. So what would be your advice here?
That's literally the hardest question in skydiving, isn't it? Because everyone has seen those people. What do they call it? There's a Dunning-Kruger graph. Have you seen the Dunning-Kruger graph where it's like people in early stages of any sport feel that extreme confidence, and then after a while they get to maybe 50 or 100 jumps and that just calms down. I don't know what the right answer is for that, because that is such a tricky thing, and you don't want to break someone's confidence. That might be the only thing that they've got. What might have created that, though, is an environment where people have felt that they can't say, I'm really scared, and they feel that actually I need to give this kind of bravado to other people. But, you know, if you're ever going to have a conversation with those people, I would say it's best to have it in private. And if it's anything about safety, it's best having an instructor do it. And if anyone else comes up with a really good solution for that, send that to me on Facebook, because those are the people that often cause a lot of our incidents. And that's sometimes the people who then progress on to downsizing really fast. We can educate people about canopies, but it's really hard to educate over an ego. I read a good book recently about, it's a book called The Ego is the Enemy. And I think it would be a really good book to give to people in those situations. Unfortunately, the problem is the people in those situations think that they wouldn't need to read it. So it's hard resolution for all of those things. I think as well, if they see kind of people at the drop zone, people who are maybe their role models, even just expressing their fear, then I think that maybe changes things a little bit as well. So, I mean, yeah. I don't think there's one solution, but it's definitely something we've all got to work together to resolve.
Yeah, true. I think indeed, if you see some of the more experienced persons being more humble, then you might think that that's a better way of acting or reacting.
Yeah.
So great. All the rest is just, great feedback that you get on your presentation. So I think that's good to start off with. So thanks a lot, Ali. That really brought some great insights, and hopefully people can use the ruler principle more often when they train people or for themselves.
Thank you.
I have to admit that even I sometimes, just before I pull my parachute open, I have to say to myself, what the heck are you doing here? And it is my fear telling myself that I'm doing something right.
Yeah.
So, yeah. All right. Thanks a lot. We'll jump over to the next part of the presentation. Somebody here is helping me out. We have a next part of the presentation. It's going to be